stories of sport professionals across the region. My name is Lily Gould.
And I'm Cash Brown.
And this is the Northwest Center for Sport podcast.
The Northwest Center for Sport, led by Director Sean Dolan, is committed to advancing knowledge and opportunities for students to allow them to lead the sport industry into the future.
You can follow the Northwest Center for Sport by following at CW_NWCS on Twitter or by looking up Northwest Center for Sport on LinkedIn. Well, Cash, do you want to introduce our guest today?
Yes, we are very excited to be introducing the NWCS guest today. She is an award-winning reporter and producer for Root Sports Northwest, a keynote speaker, communication expert, trainer, and sport broadcaster. I am very pleased to welcome Jen Mueller. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. This will be fun.
Yeah, do you want to do a little introduction yourself of kind of just introducing yourself as well?
Well, I think you guys pretty much covered it. Most recently, what people in the Pacific Northwest might know me for is I've been on the Mariners television broadcast for, I think this is year 18, and I have been on the Seahawks sidelines as their radio sideline reporter for the last 15 seasons. So those are the two sports that I cover most frequently.
Sweet. Well, thank you for joining us today. We'll go ahead and just hop right into the questions for you and get started.
Yeah. So what was your journey like after finishing college at Southern Methodist University?
You know, I hate to tell you, but it was kind of just a boring career path because once you get into broadcasting, it's kind of just about taking the next step. I mean, my first job out of college was as an associate sports producer. I was booking guests for our nightly sports talk show in Dallas. And then I got a job as an associate producer in Seattle. And you know, you kind of go from associate producer to weekend producer to night side producer. And that's just the progression of how job titles work. I will say, though, for me, getting on camera was a little bit different because even though I knew I wanted to be on TV and give that a shot, because my first job was behind the scenes, I had to figure out how to get in front of the camera. And so when folks would go home at the end of their shift, which we generally worked until 11:30 or midnight at the local NBC station, I would then stay for a few hours and I would put together my own stories and voiceover packages and pretend like it was my job to do that. That's how I created a resume reel instead of moving to a small market and, you know, kind of working your way through the ranks that way. I stayed in a large market in Seattle, but did a whole bunch of things on the side to beef up my on-air resume.
Well, yeah, would you say, I know you said you got a lot of experience while you were, you know, actually in the studio for your job, but would you feel like your college experience gave you more educational value or like experiential value? Did they let you do a whole bunch of stuff through your major?
So this was the thing about going to Southern Methodist in Dallas. At the time, we did not have a student-run TV station. Now that has changed. We did have some radio stuff. We had a student newspaper, but the value of going to college, number one, you did learn things about production and broadcasting that you are expected to know when you go into the industry. I mean, there's just some things that they're not going to back up and tell you when they hire you. But I think most importantly, it gives you access to internships. And when you were in school, there's a lot of people who will help you by doing informational interviews, by doing podcasts and things like this. So while I did not work hands-on at a TV station until I got my first internship, I would not have gotten the internship if I was not in college. So it all kind of goes hand in hand.
Gotcha. You are the creator and founder of your company, Talk Sporty to Me. Can you walk us through your vision and goals when you were creating your business at first?
Yeah, you know, I did not intend to start a business, to be quite honest with you. I am an accidental entrepreneur. I thought what I was going to do is give a couple of presentations a year. I had specifically been asked to work with a group of women, half of whom knew sports, but weren't sure how to talk about it in a productive way at work. The other half didn't know like anything about sports, and they couldn't quite figure out the connection. So I was brought in to just kind of do a group presentation. I enjoyed it. I have always enjoyed speaking to people and having a microphone in my hand. And I thought there might be something a little bit more to it than just this one group. So Talk Sporty to me was because once you start doing these things, you have to have a website where people can go to and a company name and all of that. But also it's a backup plan. Because for the first, 5, 6, 10 years of my career, the general thought was if you can just make it a couple of years, that's about as much as you can hope for. They were not exactly encouraging women to go into sports when I got my degree and when I started pursuing this career. So I knew that I needed something should the industry take a turn or should a news director come in and say, yeah, we're just going to go in a different direction. So Talk Sport to me is a great passion project. It is awesome for me to get to create my own content and material. And it's also there as a revenue stream and as something that I will do after broadcasting is done.
Could you talk about some of like the benefits of creating your own business and like the challenges that you had when doing that and starting that up?
Well, there's a lot of challenges, and I will tell you, I'm glad I did not know any of the challenges. I was just naive and stubborn enough to keep going and to believe that I would figure it out. And I have figured it out. But what I love about it is having the creativity to pursue my own things. When you work in sports, and I love sports, I love talking about sports, I love interviewing athletes, but somebody is always telling you what you should be doing. Right? Your producer is telling you what they want you to talk about. Now, you can bring ideas to the table, but ultimately, you don't control your own destiny when you are working on TV and when you're working on a broadcast. There is nothing wrong with that at all. But I am the person that does not take free time in my calendar very well. I am always trying to figure out what I'm going to work on next. And so it's nice to be able to take the skills I've developed as a broadcaster and use them in a way that helps people in other industries, like in finance. Or last week, I was talking to a group of HR professionals because there's some really cool stuff that we learn in sports and in broadcasting that actually has larger applications for other people who are not in the business.
Gotcha. What advice would you give someone who is inspired to start their own business?
I would say don't look too much for the challenges because they are always going to be there. And I think you have to know what sets you apart and recognize that you're still not going to get it right on the first time. You could be the expert in your field and you're still going to have to refine the process and work through and figure out what people want. It's like being an athlete, right? You're going to start at one spot and you're going to end at the other. So take the process for what it is. I would also say if you start your own business while you have another job, first of all, easier because you're not relying on your business to be your primary source of income, but make sure you have really good time management skills and that you can block out the appropriate windows of time to work on your business so that your employer is also getting like 100% of you when you are working the job that you have been hired to do.
Gotcha. So you have that business, and then I wanted to ask what inspired you to take the left field of starting your cooking show, I Cook, You Measure?
So it's actually, it's not as much out of left field as it appears. So I consider that to be part of the Talk Sporty to Me brand. I will
Okay.
eventually break that off into a separate production kind of part of that. But I Cook You Measure combines everything that I love. It combines conversation, connecting. I'm talking sports. I'm with athletes. I love to cook. I love to open a bottle of wine. So that's what we do on the show. And it was actually my radio broadcast partner or colleague, Shannon Dreyer. She does Mariners radio. And for years, we've sat next to each other on the Mariners charter flights when we travel between cities. And we were sitting there and chatting, and she said, you keep posting all of these pictures about what you're cooking and they're getting great response. You should create something around that and maybe like charge people for it, like put it behind a paywall on YouTube or something. And we kept brainstorming and we may or may not have had a glass of wine while we were doing this. And eventually she said, why don't you just you could totally do this. You could make a show. And so I give her a lot of credit for pushing me to do that. I know the TV side of things, so the TV part wasn't hard. It was just kind of, it was jumping into a bigger role of creating that content and being willing to take responsibility for everything. So it is a fun show. It is a lot of work when I'm the person who's doing, I would say 85% of the work. My photographer and editor does an awesome job, but I'm the person, marketing, selling it, making sure that those links get out, hire or getting the people in. It's fun. It's authentic. It's a lot of work, but I'm glad I started it.
Well, I've watched a couple episodes and I like it. So I find it very
Well, thank you very
interesting and very
much.
fun. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Right. So throughout your time with like multiple professional sports teams, talk about the Mariners and the Seahawks, what have you pulled from each that aided you in your career development?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, sports is sports. Now, certain seasons will teach you certain things. For example, when you work a baseball schedule, you are working every single day. The grind is legit. You may or may not get 2 consecutive days off during the month. I can guarantee you're not going to get weekends off. And it is trying to figure out how to make it new and fresh and be energized every single day when there is no break on the horizon. Now, a football season, which is happening consistently on Sundays for the most part, the grind gets different. You're taking one game and you're dissecting things that are so small in this single matchup, in this maybe this one set of plays or this one set of downs. And so now you've got to figure out how to grind in a different way. Can you make yourself study the game, study the matchup, do your homework consistently over the course of the week, even though you're only preparing for one game? I mean, I think just working with athletes in general, you figure out what it takes to be successful. And there's a couple of things in general that I know. Number one, don't put off until tomorrow what you could be doing today. And that's really practical advice for any of us who work in sports, because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know if somebody's going to get fired. I don't know if the team is going to get sold. I don't know if there's going to be a huge trade. I don't know if there's going to be a press conference called at 10 a.m. when I had intended to finish the show that I could have finished today, but I just decided to put it off till tomorrow, right? The other thing is, when you work around people who are as competitive as the athletes are, it's always about, are you challenging yourself, right? I'm watching them give 100% and doing the extra rep or hitting that personal best. Am I still finding a way to do that? Because it's really easy to mail it in, but also as a competitor, I am trying to stay at their level of competition. So I don't know if it's as much about the sport itself as it is just kind of the stamina it takes to be able to do this every day with a smile on your face and not knowing when you're going to get a break in the schedule.
Do you, like, what are some of the ways that you challenge yourself to kind of keep going and compete with the others that you work with?
Well, it's less about competing against people and more about competing against myself. So the cooking show would be a great example of that. But also for years, I produced Mariners All Access. And I took over that show about 15 years ago. The Mariners canceled the show this year, but for 15 years, I would go into spring training trying to figure out how I could make that show better, how I could do it differently, how I could use the resources that I have. And this is a big one, because you can have all sorts of ideas, but you have to be able to manage time and resources, both your own and the people around you. So how could I manage resources in a way that makes things easier for my editors or for the other producers? Can I come up with a new way to tell a story that the audience hasn't heard before, which is how I came up with segments like Can I Drive Your Car? Or this year, we did do segments that you can see in Mariners pre and post game called Alternate Sports Reality, where we had them spin the wheel and talk about what they could have done in a different sport. Those are ways that I try to compete, to see if I can continue to come up with ideas and do things better than we've done them previously.
Was there any like specific moment or opportunity that you felt really propelled you towards success?
No, and to be quite honest, there were more days that I felt like I was failing than I was succeeding. And I just kept thinking that there was going to be something good on the horizon. Honestly, it was the everyday thinking that something great was going to happen the next day. Because what happens is you get into your job, and this could be in sports, it could be in broadcasting, it could be in corporate America. You get into your job, and once that initial excitement wears off, now you're just going to work every day. And you're trying to figure out what that next cool thing is, and you want to do the cool thing, but you have to master this skill set before you can do the next cool thing. And so I think early in my career, it felt like none of that was happening fast enough. It felt like I wasn't moving forward at all. There were days I felt like I was taking steps backwards. And so I don't know that there was any one moment that did it. I think it was getting enough time in the business to look back and say, oh, I see why it took that much time, because I actually needed this experience over here to make it better on the other side of things. So I wish I had that perfect answer. It was the most encouraging, but maybe the most real I can be is just to say that that like lightning moment, it doesn't necessarily happen, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to be successful or that you're not moving forward.
Kind of following what you're saying, what advice would you give someone who's kind of at that point where they might feel like they're failing, like they don't necessarily want to keep going, but they know they should? Like, what would you give them, anything that to kind of think about and everything like that?
Well, I would say a couple of things. Number one, really evaluate whether you want to or not and why you should or shouldn't. Okay, because everybody's motivations are going to be different. I believe that if you want to be in this industry and you keep working hard and you keep finding a way to challenge yourself, that there are really awesome experiences you can have. Not everybody makes it 20 years in broadcasting, not because they didn't think it was cool, but because they had other things that they wanted to do, and that's okay too. But when you feel like you're failing, and I would say this about anything, whether it was broadcasting or anything else, figure out where you are getting a win. So when I walk into a locker room, first of all, I probably need an interview. So if I get somebody to say yes to an interview, I know that that was a win for the day. But I will tell you that more often than not, the biggest wins that I am counting are how many times people say hello to me. Because when the athletes start saying hello, and then they start saying, hi, Jen, now I know that we're building a relationship. And I know hello seems like a low bar, but think about how many times you walk past people either on your way to class or you're out for a run or you're walking on a weekend and you kind of throw up your hand to say hi and they just keep on walking right by and they don't even acknowledge you, right? So there's a chance that you never get that hello. If we look at the small ways that we win, you can get to the end of the day and you can say, you know what? 5 people said hello when I walked into the room. That's a win. Or you know what? I was able to tell somebody that I gave a great speech last week. That was a win. Even if nothing else came out of that, that was a win that I had a chance to share something that I was proud of. So I think you have to look at winning just a little bit differently to keep yourself going. You also have to evaluate whether it's worth it to keep going or whether you have experienced what you would hope to experience out of that job, out of that internship, and out of that industry.
Gotcha. When interviewing, like you just mentioned a couple minutes ago, throughout working in sports and with the Mariners, you've probably worked with a lot of non-English speaking athletes maybe. How has that affected you for preparing for an interview, knowing that they might not have that English capability?
Yep. So number one, I always try to have conversations with these guys before I need to interview them. So it goes back to relationship building and making the rounds every day when I go into the locker room or clubhouse. Those conversations don't have to be long, but I am trying to build rapport with them because there are some non-English speakers that are very willing. They really want to be interviewed. They are excited to try, but more often than not, they are timid because nobody wants to sound stupid on TV. Nobody wants to sound like they don't know what they're talking about, which is what would happen if any of us were in their native countries trying to speak a foreign language, right? So it's building rapport so that they know they can trust that I am not going to put them in a bad spot. So number one, I have to know whether they are willing to do that interview in English or not. Number two, when you think about those questions, it is the most simple, basic form of the question. So when you ask the question, it does not have a whole bunch of setup to it. What did you like about your fastball? That is it. You don't say something like, your fastball's always been a pitch you can lean on. Today you were hitting 97. Boy, we saw that a lot in the 9th inning, and then ask the question because they will get lost. So you want to slow things down just a little bit and make it super specific and direct, which, by the way, I would say for all of your interview questions, they should be very specific and direct, but particularly when you are talking to somebody that English is their second language.
How do you prepare for like other interviews other than the non-speaking athletes? Can you walk us through some of your preparing for that?
Yeah, it's the same thing, to be quite honest
Yeah.
with you. I mean, I take notes during the game, starting in the first inning or the first quarter, and I start making ideas of what the questions could be, because you don't know if that play in the first inning is the difference between a perfect game or not. You don't know whether the drive in the middle of the second quarter is actually where the momentum turned until you get to the fourth quarter. So I'm always making notes during the game. I have prepped ahead of time, so I know what the trends are. I know what the statistics say should happen in that game. So for example, you know if a team is seeing the most pitches per plate appearance of any team in the American League. And now I have something that I'm watching for. Does that trend bear out, or are we on a different kind of track in that game? And then I can measure my questions against that. So you start taking notes at the beginning of the game, and then I dial them in at the end. And those questions are very specific. I very rarely ask a tell me about, in fact, I won't ever ask a tell me about. It's never how does it feel or what were you thinking, because those create a lot of confusion when you are on live TV or radio, and you want to eliminate the confusion and the drama so people know exactly what the answer is. I might not know what the answer is, but I know that they have that answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've spoken a lot before about how important it is to build your own personal brand. Could you walk us through a little bit kind of how you built your own brand?
I don't know that I ever thought about it intentionally, to be quite honest.
Okay, gotcha.
I think a lot of it was out of necessity. So I can tell you that there's a couple of things that I am known for. Number one, I am known for being very, I'm going to say judicious with the words that I choose. I am very careful at how I characterize things. And there's a number of different reasons for that. Number one, when you work in a locker room, if you are not careful how you phrase a question or characterize a situation, you put an athlete in position to throw their teammate under the bus and create potential huge problems for me and for everybody else on the team. So I'm always very careful about how I characterize situations and how I talk about things. I am also very intentional and strategic about how I use short interactions. And part of that was out of necessity, because when I got into the industry, I wasn't guaranteed that anybody was going to pay attention to the girl who wanted to talk sports for more than 30 seconds. So I think I maximized those exchanges far better than other people do. And I think that my overall just kind of brand and style goes hand in hand. And I don't know that I thought about it at the time. Now I can tell you where it shows up, but I think it was about how you consistently show up. And certainly in our industry, the words that you choose when you show up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. What advice would you give to sport management students here at CWU who are looking to break into the sports industry? Because, it's obviously a very tough industry to get into.
Sure, it's a tough industry to get into, but so is just about everything else, right? So number one, I would remove that or reframe that and just look for the opportunity that's in front of you. So if you keep telling yourself it's going to be tough to get in, it probably will be, and you're probably going to see nothing but challenges. So look for your opening and take the opening. It will not be your dream job right out of the gate. I can promise you that, but it's the opening and the access and the experience that you need to just get started. And when you go to network, it is not about how many business cards you connect or collect and how many people you are connected with on LinkedIn. The people who will recommend you for the job have been able to see you work and can vouch for the good work that you've done and can vouch for the fact that you consistently show up. So put yourself in position to do that so that now you have a group of people who truly can advocate and can move the needle when it comes to getting a recommendation or having your name thrown out there.
You were just talking about women in sports a second ago, so I wanted to ask you, how did you get people to believe you in what you were saying about the sports when you first started and even now, especially because it's very much men in the sports industry, so any women that are breaking into that, what advice would you give them?
I don't expect people to believe me on the first encounter. And if you remove that expectation, it gets a lot easier. So I spent 10 years as a high school football official, and I cannot tell you how many times a coach would ask me what that rule was or why that flag was thrown or what the enforcement was. I would give the answer, and then they'd call over any of my other male counterparts working on the crew who would give the exact same answer. I could choose to get really upset and yell at the coach over that, or I could choose to say, you didn't have to believe me the first time, but when I consistently show you that I am correct, now I know that we have a trust and rapport. So I kind of took that expectation out of there. And I knew that if somebody was going to be constantly double checking my work, I'd better be right. And so that's just how I started preparing for things. Now, I'm not always right. I make plenty of mistakes. However, you can't force people to trust you, build rapport with you, or believe you any faster than they're willing to do that. The only thing you can do when you're thinking about what you can control in that situation is keep showing up, smiling, and doing enough work that when they ask you the question, you've got the right answer. Doesn't matter how many other people they ask, as long as you have the right answer, you'll be in good shape.
Gotcha. Before we move into some fun questions, could you walk us through some of your day-to-day operations and what you do every day?
They are really not that exciting. I mean, I hate to tell people it's not that exciting. The day generally starts with reading newspaper articles and clips about the teams that are in season. At that point, if I'm working a football game versus a baseball game, I've got a notepad with me. I will start taking notes early in the morning. Typically, there's a point in the day where I'm sending a lot of emails and making sure that I understand what we're talking about that night in the show. A lot of it is, especially during football season, it's my own homework. So once you get kind of the questions that you start thinking about, now it's up to me to dive into that. So you're just sitting at your computer doing an hour or two of research. During football season, you'll go to press conferences, ask questions. You'll go to practice. You'll ask questions after that. You'll put notes together, and I'll have pages and pages of notes and maybe use, 10% of that on a game day. Baseball's a little bit different because you're not diving in as deep, but it's still kind of the same thing. There's a point in the day where you're going to be doing some administrative work, emails, and just general work stuff. Then you'll go to the ballpark, you'll have your press conference, your media availability, you'll do your interviews, you'll rehearse for pregame, you'll do pregame, you do the game, take your notes, do your postgame, and then head off. I will tell you that behind the scenes, you are doing far more work than the few minutes that I am seen or heard on a live broadcast daily.
Perfect. So, going into some fun-ended questions for you, Jen, what is next for you in your career?
I don't know. I wish I could tell you exactly what that was going to be. I have a feeling that you will see me create a few more shows that land on YouTube. I have a feeling I will do a little bit more speaking, but right now the industry is changing a lot, and I could not even guess where I'm going to be in 12 months.
Is there another sports team that you would have liked to have worked for?
I think here in Seattle, I've worked for just about all of them except the Sounders. And soccer just is not my area of expertise. So I consider myself pretty fortunate that I've been able to cover as many different teams and leagues as I have.
Would there be any other sport other than football and baseball that you would like to cover?
Well, I've covered basketball and hockey, and I've done a lot of different things. But I would say football's probably my strongest sport, and baseball I've done for a long time and grew up watching that. So I'm in a pretty good sweet spot right now.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, that kind of concludes our interview. So do you want to add anything, kind of reflections of the interview yourself? So anything you want to add?
Nope, I think you guys covered it really well.
Perfect. Well, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Northwest Center for Sport podcast. My name is Lily Gould.
And I'm Cash Brown.
We'll see you next time.